Hello, I'm Jack Fink, and you're watching Eye on Politics on CBS News Texas.
This is CBS News Texas.
We begin with student safety. At the Texas Capitol this week, the state's top school safety officials briefed lawmakers on the results of the first round of audits conducted at thousands of campuses across the state. Inspectors checked to see if they could gain unauthorized access through unlocked doors. Governor Greg Abbott ordered these audits last year after a gunman went into an unlocked rear door at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde and shot and killed 19 students and their 2 teachers.
But we know that access control is critical. A locked door creates a time barrier. Time barriers save lives.
Top school safety officials in Texas told lawmakers about results of the first random intruder detection audits conducted at 2,800 schools across the state. At 95% of them, inspectors could not gain unauthorized access into the school. But at 5%, or 140 campuses, inspectors were able to get inside. But they didn't reveal which schools. The School Safety Center said overall that was good. The School Safety Center said that 72% of the campuses did not need any corrective action, while 28% of the campuses did need some sort of corrective action, but they didn't specify what those were. One lawmaker asked if there needs to be a way to ensure school districts comply with safety requirements.
It's not about an I gotcha, but things have to be addressed. We have to assist them with coming into compliance with school safety mandates and provide them the resources to be able to do that.
There has to be some enforcement mechanism in it. If somebody's checking, everybody cares.
School safety officials also told lawmakers that the state hasn't kept up with the rising demand for mental health services for students.
There isn't enough services there to meet the demand. You know, we have a lot of school districts that reach out to us that are working the entire threat assessment process the way that they're supposed to. But that student that needs help can't get that help for 2 months from now.
The state has a program called T-Chat, in which limited free mental health services are provided through telemedicine. But one lawmaker from rural Texas said many school districts aren't aware of it.
But I find it kind of bizarre. Very few schools that I talk to use it or even know about it.
Particularly in the rural school districts, it is less known.
That program went into effect in 2019, 1 year after the deadly high school shooting at Santa Fe High School. As for intruder audits at each campus, the Texas School Safety Center says it expects to inspect 75% of the 9,000 plus campuses statewide by the end of the school year and make the results public in June. Texas lawmakers have proposed spending $600 million on school safety during the next 2-year budget. Also this week, a state Senate committee approved a bill that would increase the penalty for illegal voting. And as you might expect, that generated a lot of debate. Under Senate Bill 2, Texas would increase the penalty for illegal voting from a Class A misdemeanor back to a second-degree felony, the way it was before it was changed 2 years ago. The author of the bill says the legislation would also remove the requirement that a person knows that it's a crime for them to vote.
Ignorance of the law is not a defense. Under Senate Bill 2, which is before the committee, if you are a felon and you know that you are a felon, you don't have to also know that it's illegal for felons to vote.
His proposal comes in response to the high-profile case surrounding Crystal Mason of Tarrant County. Last year, the state's highest criminal court, the Criminal Court of Appeals, ruled that a lower court was wrong after failing to require proof that Mason actually knew it was a crime for her to vote while she was on supervised release after serving time in federal prison for tax fraud. Mason has maintained she didn't know she was ineligible to vote. The president of the Texas NAACP opposes the new bill.
That this bill should not be discussed as simply a matter of good or bad public policy, but instead should be discussed as a clear and overt manifestation of racial bias.
When the NAACP says something like that, I will respond to it. This bill is to restore what was a penalty that was there prior, and it has absolutely no racial component whatsoever.
Instead of one innocent victim like Crystal Mason, there could be hundreds, even thousands.
At a separate Senate hearing, Texas Secretary of State Jane Nelson testified about elections that her department helps oversee.
And my goals are quite simple, and that is to have the most transparent, fair, accurate elections that we can have.
Two North Texas lawmakers want to lower the state sales tax, and they filed a bill that would do just that. One bill would cut the state's portion of the sales tax from 6.25% to 5.75%, which could save you money on a variety of goods, including big-ticket items like cars.
Sales tax is a regressive tax, so I think that's more fair to do it that way to a greater number of people.
Anything that puts more disposable income in the hands of people who really need it is a good thing.
The legislation comes as state lawmakers consider how to give Texans money back now that the budget surplus has reached a record, nearly $33 billion. Democratic State Senator Royce West of Dallas authored the sales tax cut bill.
And we want to make certain, from my perspective, that we give the broadest swath, if you will, of Texans tax relief.
Conservative Republican State Senator Bob Hall, whose district includes Rockwall and parts of eastern Dallas County, likes the measure too and has signed on as its co-author.
When we have such a surplus, I think it's the ideal time to say we can dial back on some of our revenue streams, and one of them that affects all Texans is the sales tax.
Both senators say they still also support the idea of lowering property taxes for homeowners and small to medium-sized businesses. If approved by lawmakers and signed by Governor Greg Abbott, the sales tax cut would take effect October 1st. There's also a bill that would eliminate the sales tax altogether on certain products here in Texas. That bill would exempt feminine hygiene products, children's diapers, baby wipes and bottles, and medicines, blood glucose monitoring strips, and other items.
Yes, I think there shouldn't be any tax on that. It's not just an option of something that you want, it's a need.
It would take effect September 1st if approved by lawmakers and signed by the governor. We spoke with Senators Royce West and Bob Hall, both whom represent parts of Dallas County.
This will be the session that Texans will see tax relief. And we want to make certain, from my perspective, that we give the broadest swath, if you will, of Texans tax relief, whether it be as a result of property taxes or sales taxes. Now, the question is whether we can afford it. Yes, we can afford it. The question is whether we have the political will to do it. When you begin to look at the $155 billion that's been certified for revenue purposes, we have the monies in order to do it, given the fact that the budget as introduced was about $130 million. Now, I understand that doesn't count the $33 billion that we've just kind of set aside in terms of rainy day money. So there's ample revenue available this legislative session. And if you do a trend analysis since 2004, on an average, we've seen the Texas economy, the revenue in the state climb, I think, on an average of about 10%. So assuming that that trend continues to exist, which I think it will, given the number of people that are moving to Texas, we can afford to reduce our sales tax, which gets those persons that are renting apartments and those persons that don't own homes, that gives them a property tax, as well as those persons that own homes and are subject to homesteads. So I think this is a win-win for all Texans.
And let me ask you, because the fact that you had Senator Bob Hall sign on, and he's now as a co-author to the bill that you authored, what do you think the likelihood is that this is going to pass?
Well, I think that what's going to have to people, here are the issues. Legislators, the leadership is going to have to get comfortable that by doing a sales tax cut, it doesn't hinder our ability to address issues in the future that we currently are addressing, and that the revenue sources, that sales tax revenue source will continue to grow as it has in the past. I think once they get comfortable with that, then I think that we're going to see more Democrats and Republicans getting on board this particular sales tax cut bill.
And you mentioned before this isn't as a substitute to property tax relief. You still support that.
I support that. So what you end up having is property tax relief and also sales tax relief. So those persons, frankly, that own a home and it's a homestead, the fact is that they are going to not only get property tax relief, they will also get sales tax relief.
And we talked to consumers today. Everybody we talked to loved the idea.
Well, I think that you have Democrats and Republicans on these issues, at least, maybe not DEI, but on this issue, you've got Democrats and Republicans working together to try to return money to its rightful owner, and that's the taxpayer.
Texas does not have a revenue problem. It has a spending problem. And this year, when we have such a surplus, I think it's the ideal time to say we can dial back on some of our revenue streams. And one of them that affects all Texans is the sales tax. And so I think we've pretty well demonstrated that we have all the revenue that we need to operate on. I mean, we've been spending the first couple of weeks down here in finance, listening to all kinds of new ideas on how to spend that surplus money when we did just fine the last few years without these new things. And so cutting revenue and leaving money in the pockets of all Texans, I think is the right thing to do.
I was going to ask you, do you think that, you've signed on to this bill from Senator West, who's a Democrat. Do you think that there is bipartisan support to do this?
I think there will be. I mean, it's bipartisan right now because there's not a lot that Senator West and I have joined it together on a bill. And so it's, I cannot see how in today's environment of what we have, assuming we're going to continue. I mean, if you're out there worried about the threats of the great inflation and so on, that can change things. But Texas has been prospering. We have no real reason to not expect our prosperity to continue. And in that light, we have more money than we should be spending. And so I'm fine with a cut that goes across the board and doesn't pick out any particular part of the state, but everybody buys something at the store, and this will help everybody from the very wealthy to the poor, proportionally.
And so what's the likelihood of it passing, do you believe?
I think this has a pretty good chance. I can't imagine the arguments against doing it. There will be some, but this is one. If this was a year in which we were short on the budget, I'd say no. It would have no chance of trying to trim a revenue source. But it's one that, if it's a problem, it's easy to put back on. It's not a constitutional issue, and so it can be lowered now. And by the next session, if it says, "Oh, wait a minute, things have turned around. That's not working so well. We need to put that back on." It can be done. Not that I would want it. I'm just saying that would give people, say, okay, this is not permanent. This is not a constitutional amendment. This is something that seems like the time to help the people out there in a time when everybody says we're taxed enough already. And I would completely agree with that. Here's an opportunity to cut that tax some.
Well, the calendar may say 2023, but there's a lot of buzz about 2024 in the race for the White House. Many Republicans are excited about the possibility of Florida Governor Ron DeSantis running for president against former President Donald Trump, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations and South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, and perhaps others. DeSantis is visiting Texas this weekend to address the Dallas County and Harris County Republican parties. We spoke with SMU political science professor Matthew Wilson.
Well, I think it's a definite signal that DeSantis intends to run for president. I think people have suspected that for some time. He's not a formally declared candidate, But there's really not another reason for the governor of Florida to be speaking to county Republican parties in Texas. So this certainly signals that he has national ambitions. It certainly signals that he's gearing up for a presidential run. It also is significant that he's coming to Texas because Texas is really the center of national Republican politics. There is no richer trove of funding sources, of delegates, of votes for someone running for president on the Republican side than Texas. And of course, Harris County and Dallas County are the two most significant population centers here. So it makes a lot of sense if he wants to run for president that he's trying to gather and garner support here. And I think that's what this reflects.
And what do you make of the polls? Because when you look at them, the top two are, former President Donald Trump and Governor DeSantis, and then everybody else is way back in the single digits. Some polls show a wider gap between the former president and DeSantis, but nonetheless, they are the top two. And the fact that, Governor DeSantis has written a book and former President Trump is attacking Governor DeSantis quite a bit. What do you make of all this?
Well, DeSantis is clearly the main challenger to former President Trump. He polls far ahead of any other non-Trump Republican. And the polls are kind of all over the place on the Trump versus DeSantis contest. Some polls have shown Trump in the lead by a substantial amount. Others have shown a very close race. Some polls in key states like New Hampshire, like California, like Florida, have actually shown DeSantis leading Trump. So we get a very mixed picture of which of them has the advantage based on the polling. At this stage, though, it's very early to be putting too much stock in the polls. The critical thing at this juncture is building support on the ground among activists, among donors, among those who are really influencers within the Republican Party. And I think that's really what DeSantis is focused on. Trump already has those networks. Trump is a household name for all Americans. DeSantis is widely known among those people who are really engaged in politics, but perhaps less so among those who only kind of casually pay attention to politics. So the big mission for DeSantis is going to be to close that name recognition gap with Trump. And I think he's assiduously to do that.
Yeah, I mean, Republicans that I've spoken with have told me there are those who are in Trump's camp regardless, and there are those who want to keep an open mind and want the process of the primaries to go through. They want to see what both candidates and others have to say about all this.
Right.
And so what is the challenge for DeSantis in these coming months?
Well, I think the polling suggests that most Republicans would prefer someone other than Trump to be the Republican nominee. Trump has a hard core of support. It's maybe 30 to 35% of the party that are absolute Trumpers, and he is clearly going to be their first choice. But that leaves 65% or so who would like someone else. Now, the key for DeSantis is to become the candidate for all of those people who want someone else. And so the key thing for him will be to clear the field relatively quickly of the other people who have declared, the Nikki Haley's, the Mike Pompeo's, the other potential candidates, because all that those other candidates will do is to divide the anti-Trump sentiment and support within the party. So coalescing that anti-Trump sentiment within the Republican Party is really job one for DeSantis.
And we have to mention, obviously, Governor Greg Abbott and Texas Senator Ted Cruz. And it seems as if, Governor Abbott hasn't written any book that I'm aware of. He hasn't traveled really to other states. So it seems like he, even though he won't come out and rule out a run, he hasn't given any indication that he is. And when I asked Senator Ted Cruz about whether he would rule out, he didn't go there. He just, all he would say is there'll be plenty of time to talk about 2024. But at the same time, he says he is focused on running for reelection in the Senate. So what do you make of both of them?
Well, neither Cruz nor Abbott right now looks like they are actively preparing for a presidential run. They're not going to definitively rule it out. They're leaving the door open, but they're not doing the sort of aggressive things that someone like Nikki Haley or someone like Ron DeSantis is doing, because those are the things that would signal that this person is definitely going to throw their hat in the ring. I suspect that in the end, Cruz will run for re-election to the Senate. I suspect in the end that Greg Abbott will remain the governor of Texas. I don't see them as likely contenders for the 2024 nomination. I think Ted Cruz feels like he's been there, done that in terms of battling Trump in a primary campaign. I don't think he relishes the prospect of doing that again. And those who would like to see someone other than Trump as the Republican nominee really have to be concerned if everybody and his brother throws their hat in the ring, because that simply makes Trump's path to renomination easier.
And my last question to you is, it looks like all indications that President Biden is going to run for re-election. I've heard that from people within the Democratic Party and the higher ups. But I'm wondering, because I've also seen polls that say people don't want to see a rematch of 2020, in which, now President Biden will go up against former President Trump. And yet, when you look at the polls from the different parties, the Democrats favor Biden and the Republicans favor Trump. So how do you square all the polling? Some of it saying they don't want a rematch, and some of it showing on a party basis they do like that idea.
Well, there's a difference between saying I'd like someone other than Biden or I'd like someone other than Trump, and settling on exactly who that other person is. Because it's true, most Democrats would prefer that Joe Biden not be their nominee in 2024. Most Republicans would prefer that Donald Trump not be their nominee in 2024. But those who don't want Trump or Biden are not all of the same mind about who that alternative is. And that's the advantage that both Trump and Biden have, that there is not a coalescing behind an alternative within the party. And so that's the process that we'll have to see play out. Do those who would prefer other nominees actually coalesce behind a specific individual who would be the alternative to Biden on the Democratic side or the alternative to Trump on the Republican side? And 2024 will largely be about that.
Always appreciate the insight, SMU political science professor Matthew Wilson. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
All right, no problem. Thanks, Jack.
That's all for Eye on Politics this week. I'm Jack Fink. Thank you for joining us. Remember, our full interviews are on our website, cbsnewstexas.com. Click on Jack Fink Interviews. We'll see you again next week. You're watching CBS News Texas.